Hello, I'm your host, David Barnard, and with me today, Revenue Cat CEO Jacob Eiting. Our guest today is Francescu Santoni, the CEO and co-founder of Mojo, an app that enables everyone to easily create top-notch videos for Instagram and TikTok. On the podcast, we talk with Francescu about how Mojo grew to over 1 million in ARR, the most impactful pricing and paywall experiments, and why it's important to choose complexity instead of just letting it happen. Hey, Francescu, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Hey, super excited to be there.
And Jacob, nice to have you on the podcast today.
I'm here, David. I'm ready to talk about subscriptions and with a person I've known for a very long time. So
nice.
It's exciting.
So speaking of long time, I did want to kind of go back in history a little bit. We don't always dig into the history of apps and founding stories and stuff, but you've got an especially cool one. So tell me about what you were doing way back in 2013 and how that kind of brought you to founding Mojo.
Yeah, I think like the relationship that I have with apps and video is long. I think a bit like Jacob. I started like as an iOS developer and an entrepreneur, but around mobile apps. And in 2013, for the first time, I was an employee as an iOS developer. I met my co-founder there, but also my team was great because I was working with Mathieu from Photoroom, which I think is also a huge fan of Revenue Cat.
Yeah.
Like me. We did work on this cool video editing app together and with, of course, a small ninja startup team. And we got acquired by GoPro. So we continued to work on video.
That became the official GoPro app, right? For a while or?
Yeah, exactly. We transformed like the replay app into the quick app.
Yeah, which is still the base of the GoPro app. Every time I open it. Yeah, I think about you guys.
But it was also a lot of fun story, both in terms of engineering and product, like the transformation of a product into another one was really, at the time, also a fun story. They also acquired Splice, another video editor at the exact same time. So we had to merge code. And
that had to be, we could do a whole podcast on the social and emotional dynamics of that, I'm sure. Also, GoPro was already public at the time, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we got some shares, but unfortunately that went down.
Public markets are tough, you know?
DJI phones. But the brand is still like amazing. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, they still make great cameras. The software is really good. Like I use your old app whenever I live stream my race car races. I use the quick app to set up live streaming straight from the GoPro to the hotspot and all that. So it's pretty interesting. Even if the equity didn't pan out, it's neat to still have the impact, right?
That's sure. And
and the bigger impact, and you kind of brush over it a little bit, but it is you were working with Mathieu from Photoroom, who went on to found what's now one of the biggest apps in photo. You went on to found Mojo, which we're going to talk about, with a co-founder who was there. Huge successful app. And then the CTO at Hugging Face was also there at the time. So you've got this like replay mafia. I think that's true of a lot of startups, you know, like the PayPal mafia, like when you get a lot of really smart people together
and
like
have similar experiences, and then you also get a built-in network. But you guys probably can take some credit for like France's reputation in AI, right? Like not all of it, but like there is a reputation that Paris specifically in France has, like after San Francisco, it might be like the most known hub for AI right now. And it's not in spite of this, right?
Yeah, I think like Julien and Mathieu were like the pioneers of actual applied AI in France, and they really paved the way. And we also got those new players like Mistral. We also got the poolside team moved from, I think, the US to France. So yeah, I think like right now, but don't start me about AI because we will never end up talking about neither mobile or growth.
I mean, it goes to show that like the folks that are winning in this category or like seem like way ahead in this category didn't start last year. They started a decade ago, right? And we're building the expertise, and then the right moment happens, and then all of a sudden you have a thing. But yeah, these talent density networks are really interesting in our thing. I strive to one day create a Revenue Cat mafia. That's my dream.
We're never going to leave, Jacob. Come on, man.
Right. Yeah. That's what all
you're stuck with me.
The fun story is like Hugging Face, actually, now that I think about it, and hello to Clément and Julien, they started as a mobile app, a chatbot, like a Tamagotchi-like, a virtual friend. So I think like at some point the circle will close because I think they should do it again.
It also highlights how interleaved mobile and AI is. Like, I think there's been some people being like, mobile is over and apps are over and AI is starting. And it's like, they're the same thing. Like the AI revolution is another app revolution. And in some cases came very much from the talent and like learnings of those. You know, it's just a great form factor for it. So
I think for AI, I think something that's never said enough. I think like AI simplify so many things, that you can make even more things in mobile, especially on the creation side. So, like consumption on mobile is normal, but creation and like photo room, like Mojo, I think like creation on mobile will get much, much bigger thanks to AI. And we also have this kind of US or European point of view. But if you think about even our top markets like Brazil or Asia, they don't even have laptops or computers. So if you bring like that power into mobile, meaning that you can do a lot more stuff with less and fewer like interface. So
I didn't even think about that the leverage you get out of like a textual interface gets you much more difference on a mobile device than it does on a laptop where like, yeah, maybe point and click is actually pretty good, right? That's interesting. It highlights like the constraints of human computer interfaces, right? And that's actually probably where a lot of our constraints lie today. Anyway, we're here to talk about apps. So let's
and we're here to talk about the story. We already dove down a pretty deep rabbit hole, but I want to resurface and say, I think a lot of people listening to this podcast, whether they're already working at an app company or like dreaming of a side project or whatever, if you're working at a huge company and you think you want to start a little startup, maybe go find a cool app startup to join and find one of those high density places and then go start your startup after that. It's pretty cool how many people from that team went on to found very successful companies. And it's probably not a coincidence.
Yeah.
I can double down on that just because just after uni, I immediately started my first 2 companies in mobile that I failed like miserably, but I learned a lot. And once I started to really join that really talented team at Stupeflix, I've learned so much that then starting a company again was much easier. And I don't spoil also, but I think like mobile and AI from the previous founder of Stupeflix, maybe they are also planning something cool. So
nice. And then to close that loop, a year after joining GoPro, you and your co-founder left GoPro and started a new app and went through YC. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, basically we're obsessed about going fast, having impact and having a lot of fun. And so we were always looking for like this innovative idea in creativity. And the fun part is also we did AI back then, but it was the previous wave that didn't really took off, deep learning and CNN and all of this. So we decided basically to make like an animation app. You could put 3D text in the real world. So augmented reality, we were a bit too early, let's say, but we had so much fun and we applied to YC. But we were like, at the time, French to YC was not like a big thing. So we were like not really thinking that we had a realistic chance, but eventually we got in and we learned so much. And then we were followed by Revenue Cat, I think the next batch, and then Photo Room not so long after.
Yeah, it was all around 2017, 18. Yeah.
And so you started the augmented reality app and raised money through YC and went through YC with that and then pivoted?
Yeah, it was hard because I think like, and this is a good lesson actually for the sub club. Basically what we've successfully done with the augmented reality app, that was, we got like a wow effect. So basically when you started the app, you will show immediately like something that you wouldn't think were possible with technology. So you will see your actual text in 3D in the real world. And that was so cool. We were also detecting emotion and putting emojis automatically. So people were so hyped that they were downloading the app a lot. Apple was also super hyped because the quality was there and AR, of course, was very strategic for them. But so we got like those hundreds of thousands of downloads in a few months. And it's really, really hard to at some point acknowledge that you have to shut down something like that. So basically the reason we did that and the proxy metrics that we use, and thanks to YC, is like, you really have to do something that people love first. So no matter like if you have like 1 million users that just like your product and don't come back, you need to find those 100 users that are really dying for your product. And we couldn't crack any engagement metrics like retention or stickiness. And we tried a lot of things in AR. We tried to really pivot inside the app first. So we did interactive stuff during the 2018 World Cup with live scores and a lot of things, gaming, dancing. We tried brainstorm on a lot of things. But at some point you have to realize that it was too early for augmented reality to take off. And we really recentered on our core beliefs around video creation. So good learnings, but really hard time when you go back to zero and say, okay, now we have to find an idea.
Those retention metrics. I just was talking to a very nascent founder yesterday who's just launching an app and was like, oh, I think it's got legs or whatever. And I was like, what's your retention? Like, that's what matters, right? I don't care how many downloads you have. I don't care if you've been featured. It's like, how many people are using the app, how many people are coming back, and then if you're paying, like how many people are like renewing. Or paying is interesting, but also like renewing. And the thing is you can't hide. Like you can't hide that, right? If people aren't loving your product, they're not going to keep opening it. And I've been in that world too, where you're like, you've got something, you kind of try to like wander around a local maxima, right? Which is good. Eventually you find like, okay, you try moving in as many orthogonal directions as you can understand. And then if you don't see a big lift, then at some point you have to go like, well, we need to jump somewhere else in the distribution, right?
I think a really good way to think about that is, do you have a gimmick or do you have a product? And a gimmick can be fun. And
it can be the start of something, right? Like
yeah. It can be the start of something, but like it has to turn into a product. And I think you can even, and this is something to think about, even as you're kind of adding features to an existing app that maybe have some level of product market fit, is that, and I chased my tail a lot with my Launch in a Pro app, because I would get these big splashy launches because we do something super innovative, but then it wouldn't stick as like a real feature. It wasn't a real product. It was just something that got people hyped, got a lot of downloads, but it wasn't a real business. It wasn't a real product. People wouldn't engage with it over time. People downloaded, played with it for a minute and moved on with their lives. So like you really got to build the features and the products that people are going to come back to your point, Francescu, that you didn't have a business. People weren't engaging over time. And it's great that you figured out that you needed to pivot and like made those hard choices.
Yeah, and Apple's love can actually make this worse, right?
Yeah.
Like they can kind of artificially inflate your organics, right?
That was the main reason that we actually added like subscription into Mojo, like from the get-go.
Right away. I remember talking to you about this. Yeah.
Yeah. As you said, like you have this kind of funnel. Yeah, of course we need activation, but we didn't even add like an onboarding paywall for a few years, because what we wanted to measure is the actual interest. And so at some point, of course, you have to grow a bit more. So you put this paywall into the onboarding.
$1 is $1, right? Like if you can capture $1, you've captured something measurable and real, and you can't really lie to yourself, right?
That's the best proxy ever.
Yeah, and even if it's small dollars, right? It doesn't matter if you can move that up. Now you have something measurable that you know is like real. And then, like you said, like when it's time to actually make money, then you can start to think about how to actually optimize for that. But there's some argument to like, you have to build a lot of stuff to justify a subscription on day one. But I mean, not that much stuff, right? Like take one really cool thing, put it behind a paywall and see what you get. There's no harm in that. I think some people are embarrassed to like charge for something not done, but it's like, whatever. People don't have to buy it. Nobody's entitled to what you built, right?
We were very, very embarrassed.
Yeah, you should be. You should be. It's good. I mean, starting anything is embarrassing. That's the thing, is like if you can't just manage embarrassment for a really long time, you're probably not going to build something.
So as you pivoted into Mojo, what did that early first launch of the Mojo app look like?
Yeah, I think like Jacob said, that like you have to be a bit ashamed. So we were like just pivoting, and we were at funding story, like, should we give back the money to investors? Or so we took that call with our YC partners, so Michael and Gustav. They were like almost laughing at us, it's like, what are you talking? We invested in you, not in your product. That's throw emojis everywhere, And basically the first thing that they said, and that I say also as a business angel and coach sometimes, is like, it's never too early to release your product, right? So I think we took like still 2 full months, a bit more, to build the first version, that what I called alpha. And we did a product hunt. And basically that day, we decided to put subscription for the get-go. That's, I think, the first time that I talked to Jacob. I remember we are just the two of us, my co-founder and I, plus an intern, which is now working on an AI app. And we were like, if on the day 0, we get 1 trial, and at that time, the trial was 30 days, because we didn't want anyone to pay by accident. Evan wanted to put like $1 a month, a subscription, but we eventually set it to 10. And we are like, if we get 1 trial period from 1 country that we don't know, so except US and France, because our friends maybe, we will celebrate. And we got, I think on the day 0, like 30 trials. So Evan was the app that we thought was broken. We really thought that the app was broken. You could like, half of the things were glitchy, but you can provide value to people. And what we enabled people to do was actually like much, much needed. And we didn't realize that until the actual launch.
Yeah, I do really think with ideas, people are always like, oh, does this have legs? Like whatever. And if you're like asking yourself, it's probably not. Even Revenue Cat, it took a longer for a B2B thing to get any sort of like positive feedback, but I could tell in conversations with people, and I could tell there was legs and stuff. But for consumer, it pops. Like if it's good enough, it'll pop, right? Now, can you build something sustaining and differentiated? That's a different question. But yeah, often like you have good signal on day 0 when something's really, really useful.
Yeah. And then skipping ahead to today, you shared with me that Mojo now does over $1 million in MRR, has over 40 million downloads, and does that with a team of 30. So incredibly successful by most metrics. And so I wanted to kind of go through some of the things that it took to get there, some of the experiments, some of what the team has done with such a small team to build such a great business around this kind of early app. So I wanted to start with pricing and paywalls and like, what are some of the bigger lessons you've learned growing to this size around paywalls?
Yeah, I think like paywalls is a good example of things that we did very late on because we were like heavily focused on the product. But at some point you cannot take things for granted, right? So of course, most of the value you capture is from your product itself and from the value that you provide to your users. But at some point you have to show them that. Like I remember because the first signal that we got was from the App Store team from Apple with like, you're not pushing your paywall enough. And the first paywall experiment that we did without even changing the paywall was putting it at the end of the onboarding, which was everyone was doing that, but we were like, oh, but they didn't try the app yet and whatever. But it's like, but they have a trial. So the first actual like big experiment that we had was like the onboarding paywall. And I think it's accounts for most of the trial even today. And then slowly like moving, of course, of the funnel of impact. So the paywall position on top. Then you want to iterate, of course, on the paywall design, the paywall kind of layout and core narrative of the paywall, right? Do you want to use the kind of...
How do you split that? Like, how much do you think about like visual aspects and like the weights and things like that, which matter? Like there's subconscious and psychological things. And then also, how do you think about what it's actually saying? What is the actual message?
Yeah, so I think like we were super lucky at some point to hire someone dedicated to monetization, Mikal. I think he wrote a great article on the Revenue Cat blog, actually, about our experiment and the growth. So what we've done, like, as you said, we are like a small team. So every decision, every focus is like, you cannot spread too much your attention and you really have to be focused. So what we've done is basically do one quarter after another, focusing on those kind of prioritization parts. So first is like position of the paywall. Two is totally different paywalls. Just try different paywalls. One with a video. What we did is like mixing silver bullets. At any given point, you will hear from like, oh, you have to show a video, a simple, like a lot of text. And sometimes it's like scrolling. Sometimes it's like you have to do like a trial reminder, putting the trial to go. Yeah. There's so many kind of best practices that change over time. So just changing this kind of big different concepts was really helpful because you never know with this kind of audience what will work better. Then we've done that a bit more localized also into different countries, because I think it's also one specificity that we have also as a European company. I think we all, from the get-go, you have like this very international worldwide view where like, I think US is like a third of revenues only. Number one country, yes, but just a third. So then you always have to think about all the countries. So big layer change. When one paywall is working, you can do like smaller change within that. And then you do price testing, right? And really changing the price and see what works. But it's hard because what I say is like, you should basically take two things into consideration. One is, of course, the average revenue per user that you get, ARPU. But the other is like what is aligned with your product, because some products are more naturally aligned with more like B2C distribution. So you want that to be a bit cheaper, even if you lose a bit of money starting, maybe we get it on the longer run. And other, you want to focus on high quality users. So you want to charge a bit more. And you can look at different pricing on the industry, like video editing, photo editing, and you will see basically where you are. In our case, it was like charging a bit more because also it was profitable a bit more for us, but also targeting a bit more prosumer users, right? Like small businesses and so on. Because when you have a freemium app, you get a lot of free users. And it's hard to, sometimes they will pay, but cancel early. And it's hard to get all of the signal. And even now, to be honest, it's a problem that we're still focusing on is like, how do you get your core user base to pay the right price without losing the benefit of the other?
I mean, that's just pricing and packaging, right? Are you doing like any separation in tiers or anything like this now?
That's something that we didn't try. We didn't try basically what we have still left in the monetization side is trying the weekly. We didn't try. Trying the, as you said, changing the limiting factor factor in any given price and doing like maybe
like what
different price
features?
tiers. Yeah, exactly. What feature going to what plan? Businesses actually, they often like you do user interviews. They say, oh, I don't understand why you charge like 60, 70 a year. And sometimes like App Store reviews like, wow, what this price is like.
Yeah, right.
Does not make sense.
Well, it's like the product generates massively different surplus value depending on how it's being used, right? And so one of my gifts at Revenue Cat is like, I kind of can understand the value generated to some degree, right? And measure, but like for consumer apps, it is very different, right? I think it's one of the core challenges of doing price discrimination. Matthew talked about this a couple of years ago when he's on the podcast, but this has been a big part of their strategy too, is like differentiating between these different use cases and like trying to like hit them with the right price points. And I think as we see more, we were talking about the power of mobile first tooling at the top of the call. And I think like more and more apps are going to see this, where the breakout apps, if you're not like a Duolingo, if you're not like a massive consumer brand, the other path is going to be this like B2C, B2B prosumer path. So I think there's a lot to be figured out there because it's complex, right?
Yeah. Anytime you're helping somebody make money, you can charge more money.
Yeah, it's a surplus value,
like,
right? Like you're capturing surplus value.
And for somebody who's just like a random person posting to TikTok or Instagram, there's not a lot of value for them personally, and their grandma seeing.
At least not something they translate easily to cash, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And those are the people who are like $60 a year to like post better videos to Instagram. This is insane.
It's so funny how that affects so many people. Like how mad that makes. I've probably said this on podcast 100 times, but if somebody isn't mad at you about your pricing's wrong. Right. Like if you make everybody happy, you're definitely underpricing. Right. And so it's about strategically deciding how many people you want to make mad and who you want to make mad. And it's actually a good signal if people are complaining about your price a little bit. Right. Because you can always take that information, adjust it and things like this. But the last thing you want to do is, especially when you're on the outset, is like set your price point super low. Because then like, not only have you like left a lot of money on the table, you've also set the perception that your product's not worth that much. Right. And so like, if the developer's saying it's only worth $1, why am I going to value this thing? Right.
You want a fun story about that?
Sure.
Yeah, we do.
No, I think about it. I got a user telling us that we should charge way more. So like they end up with less users using Mojo and the pro, like the top templates, so they could stand up even more on
that's
social
really
media.
interesting.
Like you should charge even 10, like, because some people, they create even agencies out of Mojo. Like they will hire like 3 freelancers and they will charge the business.
We should give people sub club challenges, David. It's a new bit. But like your sub club challenge is this: create $100 a month SKU that's just full of exclusivity, luxury templates, right? I would be really interested to see what that experiment yields, right? And trade off, because again, it's like, there are people for whom that exclusivity has a lot of value, right? And you can capture some of that, I think. So it's the whole LVMH model, right? Like just charge for exclusivity. It'd be very French, right? Of course.
Yeah, exactly. As French, we love design, we love tech and science, and math and luxury and exclusivity. So it's fine.
So it sounds like you did raise your prices significantly. Did that have a huge impact on the business?
Yeah, it did. I think IRP increased like in the range of plus 50% at some point. So yeah, it had like a huge impact with all the testing. And sometimes it's like just, I think like the latest experiment that we had is like we didn't realize that Turkey inflation was eating them and the price point there and whatever. So Michael had a test like a few weeks ago that we roll out with like plus 100% their IRPU because inflation and all of this. So sometimes it's just like you don't see how much this can impact your users and also positively. And even now, I think like we didn't crack the logic of it, like the core, as you said, like how do you split? Because every time we increase the price, we also make those part of the user that tried the product, but then at some point they don't get enough value, so they churn more. So if we had like several price points, I think would be the perfect thing. But it's also, we are humble enough to know that it's hard to manage like several price points and tiers.
It's hard to manage because it's complex. And if it's complex for you, your customers are also going to be confused. And that in itself will create downward pressure on conversions if it's like hard to buy. And I think that's the challenge.
And even for the engineering team and, everything that you do, then you have to think about, is it tier 1, tier 2 and metrics and all of this. Yeah. There are like 2 kind of companies or product or developers, like the one that's always say that it's easy. And sometimes I'm a bit like this. And sometimes you're also humbled down by whoa, it looked easy, but actually this simple stuff, like it should take like 2 days, but
it's
it took like
1,000 little ropes,
2 months.
right? That like holds you down over time as you build. Like I think about us, we've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're on like we have like 7 plans over 3 iterations. And that's not a ton for consumer, especially if you're like doing it in different countries and stuff. But even that of thinking about all the transition states between those different things and like why, and like, not only do you have to make that work commercially so that you're like, oh, what happens to people on this plan to compare to the new plan and all that stuff, but you also have to make it work technically, right? It's like what happens technically when this person wants to go to this plan, and then thirdly operationally, which is like how do we read that data, how do we put it into our charts, like all of that stuff. The complexity grows. So like we push experimentation and trying stuff, but like I do think there is a limit to the amount of complexity unless you have a really good process for like trying and shutting down things and clearing it out. But like I'm curious, like what would you say like percentage of your R&D resources go into like monetization and building that stuff versus building new product? Do you have like a split in mind, or is it like 1 quarter we're focused on this, 1 quarter we're focused on this? Like how
we just have one guy on monetization.
Just one guy, just going. He's got Superwall, Revenue Cat, just ripping.
Yeah,
I got it.
No, but it's true. We're using Revenue Cat a lot from the get-go. I think like at the time it was like super controversial because people were saying like it's easy and that. But
yeah, we were talking about this before the call. Like you were a very early adopter.
Yeah, because I think like that's exactly the kind of thing that from the outside is like, oh yeah, it's super easy. The SDK, it's getting better. Maybe the start kit part, but
it's definitely different now than it was in 2018 for sure.
Yeah. But it was still good enough, for you to do things easily. But you always have this kind of, if you want to be really into excellence and have this great experience, you always lacked a bit of the nice touch.
Yeah.
Make it work perfectly.
Yeah, and even today with StoreKit 2, as easy as it is, you said you launched the MVP of Mojo in 2 months. You're not going to launch an MVP in 2 months
with monetization.
If you're building out your own subscriptions and paywalls and everything else.
At least like in a future-proof way. We're transitioning to the ad segment, but we were talking about how in the early days, the early adopters really had to be believers. Like they had to have as much conviction as you do that this is a good idea, that you don't need to convince them. And it's like going back to your first launch of Mojo, it's like, that's who you're looking for. You're looking for those first couple of users who get it and they can see through how bad it is and see through like all of it and still understand it. And the other, crossing the chasm to Turkey and like all those other things, like really can wait. You really just want to find those like couple. And you were definitely of that first couple. I think you were in our first 100 apps, right? But like every single one of those people kind of had to have a real belief in Revenue Cat. And then over time, we were talking before the call, it's now become the opposite where it's often you see people being like, oh, don't do anything else, right? It was very non-consensus at the beginning, which is true to some degree for all tools, right? Like I think we're seeing it now with like generally AI and like when to use LLMs and not, and like all of this stuff, right? It's very, and then at some point it'll switch to everybody being like, why are you doing this that stupid way,
Yeah, but you were talking about pricing and having a dedicated person and like what kind of focus you have on monetization and the split between like product and monetization. We can't chase a rabbit hole, but I wanted to get back to that.
I had an opportunity to shill my company, David. I could not leave it. I could not pass it by.
I started the shill. It's my fault. But I wanted to get back to that because I'd love to hear your thinking about like how much iteration you put into the monetization side of things versus like Jacob was asking versus product and how you balance that when there is so much low hanging fruit and constantly iterating on pricing and packaging, but like you got to have a product to sell too. It's like all these things are a tough balance.
Yeah, for us, what worked well so far is really to put that, like with no sponsorship intended. And I can also quote Superwall to make that a bit even because we use that for the paywalls. But if you like get the right tooling and the right person that is obsessed about that, then you can iterate like a lot. And Mikael is doing like a lot of experiments. He's really dedicated to that growth part and monetization, paywall, pricing, onboarding, CRM. We don't do yet. We might do a bit more with Mikael. So yeah, from time to time, like international expansion, he gets like one developer when we need for experimentation, but most of it actually he can do it like by himself.
Are they a technical background or engineer or like a growth marketer? Like what's
not necessarily, but he has really like this data mind. He's from Czech Republic and with like this kind of structure approach with like everything is documented in the Notion or experiment. And this is working very well. But for the product part too, yeah, you're right. Because I think I'm coming back to the first part and maybe an advice for the creative space. I think like the sub club listener can be divided between the people that are more maybe business side and want to try apps and make it. And with AI today, I think it's really a new El Dorado, like kind of God rush. But there are also a lot of more indie developers that have this craft. And I think like that's originally our developers. And for those, I think in creative space, never forget that we are lucky enough to kind of build product where people will create something that they will inherently share. So either like with the watermark or better with Mojo at the beginning, I think until like several $100,000 per month, we spent $0 in ads. Why? Because we invented basically the animated posters in stories. Like it didn't exist. When people saw like a random guy posting like this super great video, like animated poster on Instagram, they were like asking in the DMs, like, how did you do that? And that's not you. And people were just referring the app without any like referral mechanism. So that's also kind of I wanted to give a bit of hope to developers, like, because it's hard often to know how to put effort, like where do we put effort, like all in ASO, UA versus like product. But if you really are like into the right product angle, you can make it by having something like inherently superior as long as it's like intrinsic distribution channel. You want the output of your app to be visible. And if you have that, think about how you can leverage that to get like some...
Well, it's just much more efficient, right? Than having to spend, even ASO, you have to spend to like get it right. And then obviously acquisition is a very $1 in, $10 out or whatever. Like it's not a highly leveraged game versus having, you used to call K factor. I don't know if people still call that, but like how many downloads does a download beget? But building that into your product from the beginning, it will make a difference. And like, you don't have to do it. I actually would suggest not doing it in a way that's like very clearly just like an afterthought, right? It's just like, oh, share your scorecard or like whatever. Like that's fine. But what you want to do is like think about a way, like your product is made for sharing, right? So it's kind of built in. And that's the case with a lot of like photo editing stuff, maybe some more than others, or like creation stuff. But you can think about it in other aspects, right? Like invites are like a famous in social, like invites are the thing, which I don't know if you saw, they're shutting off free access to contact books. So we'll never see another viral social app again, I think. But yeah, like thinking about how does the like core loop of the app, and then there's really not a clear line. There's maybe monetization, but growth is actually bigger than that. Maybe it's a good chance to like ask about this. So yeah, you said initially you didn't have any growth spend and stuff like that, which I would recommend. We talk about things that like hide your lack of product market fit. Dumping a bunch of money in acquisition is a good way to convince yourself you have something when you don't.
Thank you. Yeah.
Right. So get off the ground and make sure you have something. But like you go from that like couple 100,000 to like million. What were the moves and plays that allowed you to get people driven into the app?
So from this organic push from the users and also Apple, we got also a lot featured. So again, and I'm super grateful for the App Store and also the App Store itself for existing. I'm a huge fan. No, because it's true, because before, if you remember about the other stores, like even like publishing a game on any video game console was super hard. Like distributing a software on PC, like was super hard. And the App Store is really intrinsically worldwide and all of this. So this is why I'm talking that, not just to thank the Apple team, but also because we are like this worldwide approach. We had these spikes in countries that organically we didn't spend any money. But then at some point we got like our first user acquisition guy, Anthony. That's really changed the way that we leverage this kind of smart acquisition in the fact that you can have from Apple search ads, also the kind of more broad Meta and TikTok approach. You can get ROI approach. Of course, SK Ad Network also changed the game a lot, but user acquisition was our first, let's say, non-organic growth lever with kind of an approach that was still mostly relying on this kind of organic factor. So what we did is like, at the time, it was still a thing to pay the influencers to publish in their own accounts rather than use their content to ads. So we tried like in several countries to do like those campaigns. They were not like profitable, but they enabled like in some countries. I remember like Brazil, for example. Brazil, we did the campaign. It was like a fail, small spike and this. But a few weeks later, we got the initial spark enough, and it's still among our top 5, even top 3 countries nowadays. So paid acquisition, like influencers and thing. And then that turned paid into a bigger scale with all of the challenges, right? Gross data, of course, because with SCAD network, even with MMPs.
How much effort do you put in trying to like match attribution these days?
The core thing first that we gave up in a way that we don't do like PLTV and stuff. We push a lot more the yearly plan to make that much easier.
So the idea being it's like you can get the payback on a cohort quickly,
exactly.
and then
You
you
want to get the
payback.
payback in 30 days, kind of ish.
How do you cohort? Do you like without fingerprinting or this? Do you just go by country, or you break it down to a demo, or how?
So the first split, and that is the easiest part, right? You split by country, you split by platform, also, of course, iOS and Android. That's sure. Now we went back through, and depending on the day-to-day versus longer budget allocation, you can do like on the day-to-day, it's more like on a, let's say we attribute the subscription by the date of ad spend. Let's say trial start with the ad spend of that week. But on the longer run, we do that cohort based. So basically the user acquired by a certain amount of ad spend are blended by country and also, country platform.
But you have some like shifting window cohorts where you're like, okay,
exactly.
we're just going to say that the ad money we spent in this period created these trials. Like whether or not that's accurate or not doesn't matter. It's maybe a good enough approach to make sure you're not bankrupting the company in ad spend.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe I got some feature requests for you.
Oh yeah, hit me.
I think like what we're actually using RevenueCat as one of the source of new users. Something that I think I was talking with Bernard, our head of growth lately. We're like thinking about the way to attribute actually new users or this paying should be maybe a hybrid approach where you could basically say you count as a new user, at least for attribution for that sliding window cohort. But you could have like, let's say that a user is inactive for a certain amount of time, let's say 30 days. Then you count back to the new period. Because what happened is like, when you spend a lot of money, you increase the pass cohort because you have retargeting, because of a lot of data, and some of them maybe uninstalled.
They already have the app installed, but they still click an
exactly,
ad,
or they already have, and even sometimes somehow with iCloud, and nowadays I think like even without uninstalling, because people, I'm not sure they even uninstall apps again with the automatic offloading and stuff like that. So I think like something like hybrid is something that we want to try in the next weeks.
Yeah, the world has shifted so much in attribution. I think the thing is that the new world, the new like fingerprintless world has made it so there's so much less value in the technology there, which is also why nobody's rushed in to solve it, because like there's not a huge business to build there. But for us, thinking about it, there's way things we can do. Definitely, I'll just say we're thinking about it.
One of the things that you mentioned to me when we were prepping for this conversation was don't fall into the product-led growth trap. So a lot of what we talked about early on was product-led growth, but then you did start venturing into paid user acquisition. But what did you mean by that? Don't fall into the product-led growth trap.
What I mean is basically you have to really know your strength and know what are not your strengths and what are your weaknesses. And basically you can have like 3 buckets, things that you're inherently bad at. I can give some example for me. I'm bad at ops. I'm bad at things that are boring. I'm bad at a lot of things. So I would not be like owning like a regular OPEX business, like delivery app or whatever. I will be super bad. I will be the worst CEO ever. What we are good at Mojo is like the product and the tech and this kind of angle. You have this angle, this leverage and this market, which is you create video, you create the most beautiful video. It's inherent. But then when you're kind of in the middle and you're like more like with a regular app or business centric, if you don't have this core product leg, it's not by adding like a referral or whatever that you will think that you made it, right? And I think Jacob said it, like, it's not something that you add later on, that you fake it. Of course, it's always good to do a bit, but don't think that you will crack it after a while. And if it's not in the core DNA, either in the distribution of your app or your content that you create out of your app, or the strength in your team. So what I meant by don't fall in the product-led growth is product-led growth is always kind of shiny.
You mean just make the product better and they will come, right?
Yeah, exactly. But also if you're like a business person, accept it and work on paid and make that the best LTV on CAC and beat people on the user acquisition and paywalls testing even more. And don't fall too much into, when we build like this 6 months feature of referral, the app will grow up, or when we need like the sharing those cards. Yeah, sure. But nobody shares even their Duolingo card or whatever, you know.
There are a few counterexamples of apps that don't focus on anything else and just can win through a good product, but there's always something. There's always either it's Apple love, or it's something inherently viral, or it's something inherently unique they do. I think of Anki, the like flashcard app that's very popular. It's not even a paid app, I don't think, but like they just built a really good product, but like maybe not a really good business. But like, or maybe Craigslist is a good example, right? Of where it's worked, some counterexamples of where they haven't had to really think about growth. But those are outliers. You're not Craigslist. Like you're not one of these apps that just gets lucky, probably. Being somebody who did that a lot for some years at Elevate, we wandered the wilderness on before we really dipped our toes into like leaning into a growth engine, and realizing the product's as good maybe as it's going to get within some parameters. And it had some sort of product market fit, but like we weren't going to double our retention through new features, right? There's probably some sort of inherent level that it gets to, and then you have to figure out where your leverage actually lies. So
yeah, I was really surprised, and you kind of touched on it earlier, that even at $1 million plus in MRR, you aren't doing CRM. You're not doing some of the basics.
It's that PLG.
But what you're talking about is focus, right? And so, yeah, maybe you're not doing CRM, but you have a whole person dedicated to constantly doing monetization experiments and paywall experiments and kind of looking. And it sounds like a lot of the success of Mojo is like looking at what's working and being introspective about why it's working and doubling down on those strengths versus looking at what you're weak in and overly focusing on those weaknesses.
It's true. At some point, you still have to accept, and that's why we probably will do a bit of CRM at some point. But it's exactly that, CRM is, we have like, even the top 5 languages in Mojo is like, does not account for more than 2/3 of our user base. So if you think about CRM and scaling that to different languages and having the impact, CRM is probably single digit growth so that you can activate with a lot of effort. Yeah. So we were a bit reluctant and we pushed that back. Of course, at some point you need to, as the company grow and is a bit more established, you need to take those kind of, okay, that CRM card, we need to activate it now to kind of have this bit of growth. But yeah, if you do that too early, also my biggest fear, and I think like I didn't overcome it yet, because also video market is changing fast, and especially right now in AI. And Mojo, to be honest, I don't consider it as a success yet, because I think that the future of video editing is AI. All the market is disrupt, and I love it personally. So, but everything is yet to be built. I'm always afraid to lean away from those signal of product market fit. So it's kind of also coming back to my own fears, I think, and to overcome that a bit sometime, because I need also to be a better, I think, business person and less sometime of a product guy.
Don't listen to him.
I think Jacob's framing earlier, I really liked. I'm going to steal this from you, Jacob, but I forget exactly how you said it, but it was like, you're going to piss off some people with your price. The important thing is to choose who you piss off with your price. I think this applies to building a company, is that you're going to have complexity, choose your complexity. And you want to choose that complexity based on leverage. And so right now you recognize that CRM is very complex and is relatively low leverage. Like it's going to be hard to squeeze double-digit growth out of CRM, and it's really complex. So instead, you're choosing the complexity of building into the AI future of video editing. That's a very complex thing to build. You're choosing to do something very complex, but you're doing something complex that's very high leverage, that's going to be the foundation of the business moving forward. And I think that's kind of a great
It's differentiated
it's
too,
like,
right? Like do complexity that other people can't.
For people that didn't read the piece of Paul Graham, How to Do Great Work, I strongly encourage you to read that immediately, because I think that the core thing also, that focus on the problem that you really are passionate to solve. And that's, of course, is
makes up for a lot, right? Yeah. As we scale too, and like I'm always debating with Miguel, like sure, if I spent time on every part of the business, like there's something I could improve. But like if we let every single part of the business that isn't working exactly how we'd like into our brains, we'll be paralyzed and we won't move forward on the thing that got us here in the first place. And so I think that's one of the learnings. And I don't think that really happens until you're maybe at kind of your guys' scale and above, where there's edges of the empire that you can't see anymore as a founder. And you have to just be okay with it being how it is, right? There's this thing is like, oh, just you can let fires burn. But almost worse is you just don't even know if it's a fire or not. You're like, could be a fire, could be fine. I don't really know, right?
Don't lie to us, Jacob. I think that every other week you get like this kind of stress as like, whoa, this fire is burning. But I think like I'm getting more and more like okay with those, and distance and this. But I think like the biggest challenge as a app maker, founder or whatever, I think is in there, and to change yourself to kind of perceive things differently. To really, I want to put that emphasis. Like at some point, for the same level of information, you will look at everything is not the way I want. And like the week after, nothing drastically changed. And you think, oh, we're doing good.
Yeah. The same inputs. You start to realize like how much of it is reception bias, like how you're feeling that day. I don't think that's ever stopped, right? It's like a constant oscillation between like, we're so back, it's so over, right? Over and over and again. And I think the only thing that can come with years is just realizing that the troughs are just as transient as the peaks. Just ride them out. Try not to quit when you're in a trough and keep going. I don't think I can stand behind that enough in terms of, and for people at all stages of the journey, if you're at the beginning, if you're at the end, or like whatever, like you're good at something and like you can probably build anything, but the best thing you're going to build is the thing you're good at. You maybe don't get to choose that. Like I didn't get to choose in-app purchases as the thing I was good at. It's just kind of what happened. And maybe there's an argument for like, oh, I've had a different passion for something else. But at the end of the day, performing and being good at something that you created is probably more satisfying than something you have a passion about but has no legs, right? It doesn't go anywhere. So anyway, we went from user acquisition to philosophy real fast on this episode of Sub Club.
You also have to choose which weaknesses to fill in, I think, is that, like you, Jacob, it's like you came to Revenue Cat and you coded a lot of it and you were very in the weeds. And then at some point you did have to choose to go down the company building path. And I've seen you build the skills of people management and company management. And like, you do have to fill in some of the gaps that you don't like doing. But again, it's like, find people who are good at the things that you're not good at, but then also choose the things you're going to fill in and get better at versus like, you can't be good at everything. So recognize that and then don't try to be good at everything, but pick the things you want to get better at and then find ways to work around the things you aren't high leverage for you to get better at or aren't going to move the business forward or whatever else.
Yeah, I would like to share advice, but then I think that would imply I figured something out, which I haven't. I do miss coding though. I don't know if I was ever that good of a programmer, but like I do think I was probably a better programmer than I'm not gonna say it than I'll ever be as a CEO. But there's a part of me that thinks that. I'm sure you do, Francesco, too. You think the same thing, right? Like I'll never feel as skilled or as capable as I was when I was 24 years old and like ripping code out all day.
Believe it or not, during Christmas, I took my phone and I use Replit AI to call the API of Replicate to batch AI to fine tune some parameters. I was happy just to see those line of codes.
But
I miss that
it's like,
so much.
I don't know about you, but not only have I stopped doing code, I had to kind of realize like I'll never be as good as I was, right? Like I've taken too long of a break.
But we can pretend it's fine because as we are the CEOs, like
I get to live vicariously through everybody else who gets to ship. I mean, it's fun to build things that do things, right? It's fun to build things that like do things. And like, if you can find joy in that, then it almost doesn't matter, right? You can find joy in just winning and building and making customers happy and showing up and being useful, right? That's the Arnold Schwarzenegger book. Be useful, right? Just being useful is satisfying as a human being. So anyway, this has been the Sub Club career advice and life philosophy hour, but hopefully it's compelling.
This is super fun. I think it's a great place to wrap up. Anything else you wanted to share, Francescu, as we wrap up?
First, thank you a lot for this discussion. Not only interesting, but also a great moment. And I think that's something that we can celebrate and be grateful to. I think it's very important. And also maybe a piece of advice to the people creating apps also, because it's my duty to do so on social media. Please try to create more content consistently. So not just use Mojo or any other app, but I think like one of the secrets is like the podcast is a good illustration of that. Those people building apps, you have so many things to tell, so many stories to tell. And not every one of them, of course, can go into podcast and be lucky as me. So more and more what we see on social media is like people sharing their stories by themselves and not just creators, more and more like business owners, like even like, I don't know, like restaurant owners, butchers. That will be my piece of advice for people creating projects. Like find a way to share what you're passionate about. And social media is a great way to get your first users sometimes. So piece of sponsored moment.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining us. This was such a fun chat.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. If you have a minute, please leave a review in your favorite podcast player. You can also stop by chat.subclub.com to join our private community.